EP,
Hey,
welcome,
thanks.
welcome.
Very nice.
Welcome to the House of Financial Insights.
Thanks.
It's so wonderful to host you, yeah?
Glad to be here.
Great, so please
Glad
come
to
in,
be
let me come and show you what's
Thank
going
you so
on,
much.
yeah?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Insights special feature. We are looking at Africa's Untold story, where we're going to be critically analyzing, looking beyond stereotypes. Today, we are joined by a special friend of Financial Insight, Mr. Eneya Phiri. And just to give you some context of who he is and where he comes from, he is a multi-award-winning global communication strategist with over 12 years of experience shaping narratives and reputation strategy across highly regulated sectors, from public health and international finance to next-generation consumer goods, turning complex and politically sensitive issues into communications that build trust and shape public discourse and influence high-stakes decisions. Eneya began his career in Zambia as an intern at the UNICEF-backed Scaling Up Nutrition movement. He later served head of communications for WWF Zambia, supporting global communications efforts, and then as head of communications for FSD Zambia. He then went on to become the first market lead for Africa at APO Group, a global consultancy working with citizens such as FIFA, Liquid Intelligent Technologies, and Microsoft. During that time, he served as the face and the host of the annual invite-only Novacom Summit, a platform convening tech industry leaders such as Google to shape Africa's digital future. Internationally, Eneya served as the global lead for nature and climate communications at the United Nations Environmental Programme in Geneva, Switzerland, supporting international banks to communicate their ESG commitments. Thereafter, he led science and communications in North Carolina, United States for British American Tobacco's largest market at Reynolds America. He currently heads corporate communications for North and South America at Imperial Brands, the $100 billion consumer packaged goods group. His role spans reputation, media, and stakeholder strategy across markets regulated by the United States Food and Drug Administration. His work has positioned executives, heads of states, and brands, including 2 presidents of Zambia, in the global media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, BBC, CNN, and the Finance Times. While driving impact across sustainability, science, technology, and consumer innovation, he lives in Washington, D.C., enjoys wildlife safaris when he can, the outdoors, and spends time exploring with his son, Ethan. So we could just have a round of applause for Mr. Eneya Phiri. So I will be handing over the floor to the founder of Financial Insight, Mr. Mwelwa Kenneth Chibesakunda. If we could just have a round of applause for him.
Thank you so much. Thank you for my
I hope we did justice with the intro. A lot of LinkedIn in there, but I hope it was quite accurate.
I was wondering who's the guy they're introducing. No, thank you. It's an honor, and thank you so much, everyone. I'm very happy to be here.
This is the media machine.
Yes.
These are the guys that have been able to create a formidable force, I'd say, in Zambian and international media, truth be told. But Africa's untold stories, beyond stereotypes. I know that this is something that we've had a conversation about. Why this conversation and why this conversation now?
I'm happy to be here. I follow you religiously. I think you guys are doing a great job. So kudos to you, the founder, Mwelwa, first of all, well done. And to the rest of the team, I enjoyed meeting each and every one of you. I hope I can remember all your names. But collectively, you guys are doing amazing things. I'm a lover of media and strategic communication. So to see this kind of comms at this level coming from Zambia, that's a plus for me. So well done. Please, applause for you guys. Well done. That was for you. But getting into it, again, thanks for the opportunity. Why should we talk about Africa? Why should we talk about the single narrative, the monolithic narrative that the world seems to have about Africa? Is because the stories about our continent, about our country, they all form one singular pattern. It's either conflict, poverty, or some sort of problem, right? But you and I know, and everyone in this room knows, that the continent in general, and the country specifically, is much more than that. There is so much we can talk about, from economic development, from tourism potential, the community, just the friendliness of folks. So it's important that we begin to tell the right stories about our continent. We need to be able to discuss what really this continent is about. And it starts with us. It starts with news mediums like this to be telling, and we can dig deeper in the discussion, why this is crucial. So I'm happy to be here as a Zambian, as an African, living and working in the US for a large corporation, and telling stories about our beautiful continent that resonate with who we truly are, and not the doom and gloom that has been the narrative.
Absolutely. Now, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest traps in how Africa's story is told today?
It's a good question. I'll start with, there's been a persistent negative stereotype. I think we just talked about that, right? And oftentimes, the stories about Africa that are told globally, they're centered around events, elections, maybe there's some sort of pandemic, illness, and so on. So those are the kinds of stories that end up making global headlines. Just next door, Tanzania had an election recently. Right now, the biggest trending stories across the world coming from Africa, the number one is Tanzania. The people have been killed. The election was apparently not free and fair. And a lot of commentators, I think as recent as maybe a couple of weeks ago, 17 different European countries authored a statement against everything that's going on. Now, we know that Tanzania, that's not all it's about. I mean, that's true. That's a serious problem that's going on right now, and it needs the right redress. But Tanzania is also a beautiful country. It's the host of the Serengeti. But the challenge is that when these stories begin to be told, or when they begin to be told, the focus is around some of these events. And so we in the strategic comm space, you folks in the media space, we need to deliberately start telling stories about Africa that demonstrate the positive side as well. So that's one of those traps. It's that monolithic storytelling about the continent that is tied to an event, which is usually a bad event.
Now, what's also quite interesting is, how did we get here? Are you able to explain to us, why this prejudice premium and why the narrative has, financial consequences, especially for Africans?
Absolutely. It's a great question. How did we get here? I think one of the things is that we allow other people to tell our story, right? You are Financial Insights, for example. You're a massive media machine. I love that, by the way. I love the media machine slogan. Do you allow, say, SABC to tell the story of Financial Insights? Would you do that?
No.
You wouldn't?
No.
Because they don't know Financial Insights the way you folks do, the way, where's Ngosa? I met him, there's the guy. The way he does, right? The way Chere does media. They don't know it that way. So the challenge in how we find ourselves in these situations is we allow external media to tell the story of Africa. So certainly they're not going to tell the right story. They'll tell the story from their perspective. And that becomes a challenge. And to your point, Somebody might say, all right, so somebody else is telling our story. What's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. Because of the reputation that the continent has in general, and in Zambia specifically, you find that from a financial space, the continent is suffering. There's something called, and you're a financial guy, so you know this, something called the risk, the risk premium, right? The risk is purely based on reputation that large banks and financial institutions apply on countries in Africa because of their reputation. Let's put it this way. If you have a reputation of getting credit that you don't pay back as an individual, if you have a reputation of this guy just comes and gets credit all the time and doesn't pay back, the next time you go and borrow, somebody's going to add a premium to the interest of the money you're going to pay because they want to cover their bases. That's the risk premium. And that's what's happening because of the reputation management in Africa. Because we are seen as such a high-risk continent, this is really translating into big payments that we're making to the tune of $4.2 billion. This is according to Africa No Filter, very respected group of folks who did the numbers. And they found that in 1 year, the potential for the amount of money that Africa is losing as a continent is up to $4.2 billion. Now, I know we're in the finance world, so everybody understands numbers, but let's break it down. What is $4.2 billion? That's 12 million children, my son, your son, and your son also, who could go to school. That's 73 million folks who could have access to clean water. That's what 4.2 billion can do. And that's what's being stolen away from Africa because we're not telling our stories in a positive light, and therefore our reputation is bad, and we're being, well, not bad, but our reputation is not as great as it should be, right? And then we're being applied these premiums when we go to borrow. So that's one real impact of that reputation conversation.
Now, Eneya, you've obviously followed US media for like the longest time now. You know, what lessons from US newsrooms and communications practices should Africa consider adopting?
Excellent question. I not only follow US media, I work directly with US media. As you said in the introduction, I lead corporate communications for the Imperial Brands, which is a global company. So my responsibility is to manage the business's reputation in the US market. So that's both in North and South America. So I work intimately with US media and understand. And one of the things I've noticed, so the US media is not perfect by any means. But here's what they do that we could learn from, some lessons that we could pick up, right? So an example is they focus on what is known as solutions journalism. This is where they don't only report a problem, but they talk about what can be done to fix it. I'll give you an example. Some time back in Seattle, which is it's a city in the state of Washington, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong there. Seattle noticed, and folks who lived in Seattle noticed that the school system was failing school-going children. Parents were getting up in arms and saying, we need a better school system. But everyone was talking, and that was the problem. Nobody came up with a solution, right? What the Seattle Times, which is a leading media house in that city, did was they did a solutions reporting. The first thing they did was they said, right, so this is the problem, what's the challenge? Or maybe the feeding system is not right. The curriculum is not correct for the kids. Kids are not learning what they need to be learning. What do we do about it? What's the solution? And so they pulled in researchers. They pulled in different interest groups. They pulled in decision makers, elected and appointed officials.
This is the media.
This
actually
is the media.
Bringing together.
Right. So they started by raising awareness. This is a problem, and everybody says, yeah, this is actually a problem, right? You could agree if the school system isn't working for you, it's a problem. So number one, identify the problem. Number two, what's the solution, right? And so they pulled in these different folks, and they create a dialogue and debate about it. All right, so this is the challenge. So what can we do? From a research perspective, well, the data says this, because we start with data always, right? From a decision-making perspective, well, do we have the right laws and policies in place, et cetera? And so all these people being convened by a media house, right, eventually led to a solution being found. This was called the Seattle Education Lab. It's a well-known story. It's one of the best practice examples that I can give. And over time, and I want to underline this, over time, because it has to be systematic and consistent for it to actually work. Over time, what happened in Seattle is that the school system changed. Probably one of the best now in the country, right? And all this was spearheaded by the media through what's known as solution journalism. So it's one thing to point out the problem, which is great because that creates awareness. But let's talk and explore the solution so we can fix that.
You know, Eneya, this is quite exciting, and I'm learning so much about this. But then how do US comms teams use this approach, and how can African organizations borrow from it?
It's an excellent question. One of the things that US media and US comms teams do is they treat communications like a product, right? Imagine you're developing a new product, right? Let's say somebody tell me, what's a product that comes to mind? Any product that the community can, and by the way, sorry, we're not live, right? So I can, is this okay as well to involve the audience?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Give me a name, give me a product, any product. Say again? Toothpaste. Love that. Toothpaste. She's got a good smile too, you see that? So think of toothpaste as a product. Before the product goes to market, it's researched. They look into it, they figure out the components that are going to be needed in order to make an effective toothpaste product in this case. Then they test it in a small group, right? And they get some feedback. Maybe it's working, maybe it's not working, you know, and then they do a pilot, so they don't take it out to market yet. There's certain steps that have to be taken before it actually goes to market. And oftentimes when you take these steps, what happens? The product is likely to be successful because you would have cleaned out what was a problem, you would have corrected and course corrected certain things before it goes to market. US media and strategic comms folks like myself, we treat comms as a product. If I have a message for my business and say, my business wants to hit, I'll speak from a real example. If my business wants to hit a certain market cap, right? It wants to hit a $50 billion market cap by a certain time. I know that the reputation that my business has is going to directly affect whether it manages to achieve that market cap, right? And that's good for me because my investors are happy when they see, you know, that their market cap is higher. So I develop messaging and I say, this messaging I'm going to target to FT, the Financial Times, or maybe the Wall Street Journal. But before I go there, I test it. I create a control group of folks who've either worked there, maybe friends, and that's the part about media, right? We need to make a lot of friends, right?
Correct.
So I speak to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is how we want to tailor this. Well, I think, Eneya, you need to change this. This doesn't land properly. So I go back, I restructure it, I go back to my test group, I pilot it first to my executive team. You know, they become my immediate stakeholders. Folks, what do you think about this? They come back and say, well, you know, I'm the guy on the ground. This doesn't really resonate. Or maybe I'm the guy making decisions at the FDA. This really doesn't resonate. And then you go back and you do that until you find a near perfect. It will never be perfect, that's the truth. But you've got something that's tested. You've got something that's gone through the market process. And then you go out and you put it out there. And you know what happens? More often than not, again, it's not a perfect system, but more often than not, your message resonates because it's gone through several rounds of checking, pre-checking, before you go ahead and deploy. So that is treating communications as a product.
Right. Now, this is very, very interesting. Now, let's turn our attention to Africa because obviously it hasn't just been doom and gloom.
Of course.
Where has Africa gotten storytelling right?
I'm Zambian, so I'll be very biased and say that we are getting there. We are trying, we're getting there. And I say this not because I want to win any more brownie points for being here, so you can call me back as an expert. But I say this with honesty that Financial Insights is one of those media houses that's changing the game in the way that you tell stories for the country. So in terms of what Africa has done well, there's a couple of countries that come to mind. And like I said, Zambia is one of them. But Ghana did a campaign called the Year of Return. I'll ask you a question, Mwelwa, because we're having a conversation. Who do you think globally is the most famous nationality from Africa? If you're an African and you land in London, England, where would they assume you're from?
Most likely Nigeria.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Didier Drogba.
There you go.
Samuel Eto'o.
There you
Football
go.
stars.
Football stars. There you go.
Davido for music.
There you
entertainment. The likes like that.
That's very true.
Yes. If it's leadership, Cyril Ramaphosa, he's been like in the news
Excellent.
a lot. Taking on the US.
Excellent.
Paul Kagame.
There you
is
go.
another name
There you go.
that drops more Salah right now for Liverpool fans. Yeah, but yeah.
Sorry to any Liverpool folks. Now, as I'm an Arsenal guy, we're top of the table. This
There you
is
go.
our
Oh,
season.
jeez.
We've been saying this the last 20 years, but go ahead. Go ahead.
There
I
you go.
digress.
So folks like that, when I think of, I think in the past it would have been Kofi Annan, but I think more recent,
Right.
you have like the entertainers,
Right.
Burna Boy
Right.
On entertainment, like I mentioned, Davido.
Right.
I think when it comes to more serious like politics, your Kagame, Cyril Ramaphosa.
Right.
I think now, like if I have to relate, mining, for example, HH,
There you go.
stands
100%,
yes,
100%.
exactly. Yeah, just a few.
All those are very correct and excellent examples. And I want to pick out a few things that you mentioned there. You talked about Rwanda and the Rwandan leadership. Rwanda was very deliberate about the story that it wanted to tell about itself. So it had strategic partnerships with Arsenal, of which I'm a fan, partnerships with PSG, etc. Now, initially, folks said, why? Why would anybody care? But here's what has happened over time. And again, let's underline this, over time, because it has to be consistent. There's no quick fix.
Correct.
What's happening now is that Rwanda is becoming the capital for some major sports event. In the last 5 years, they've hosted some major global cycling events. They are now known and loved around the world as a country that is built on peace. It's a clean country. Everybody hears that. And do you know that some of these small things, psychologically, they create a yearning? If you're going to go to Africa and you hear that there's a beautiful country called Rwanda that's clean, that's safe and organized and proper structures and there's no corruption, or at least there's little corruption, as an international tourist, I'm going to Rwanda. Right? That's because that's the story that they've told. And they did it deliberately. They had strategic partnerships with sports teams, etc. And that's the story now that they're telling to the world. So Rwanda is one of those that has really done it well. And now they're known. I mean, every one of us in here at least has one positive thing when they think about Rwanda.
Correct.
Right? But let's bring it back home. Realistically speaking, from a landscape and beauty standpoint, and we're Zambians, let's be biased, what does Rwanda have that Zambia doesn't?
The Victoria Falls is the first thing that comes to mind.
Right.
Abundant wildlife comparison.
We are one of the top 10 strongest holds for lions around the world. I hope we still are. At least we were some 10 years ago. But what that means is we have so much to offer the world, right? We have so much to give the world. So we have so much capital when it comes to building our story as a country, the way that Rwanda has. So to answer your question simply, Rwanda is one of those countries. South Africa is another. You talked about Cyril Ramaphosa. But South Africa, one of the key things that it's done is the power of their media as a watchdog. Right now, if you're aware of what's going on in South Africa, there's a big inquiry that's taking place, corruption-related inquiry.
Yes, yeah.
The media started that storm. The media has done this very effectively to the way that they come out and they point out wrongdoings as a credible watchdog, and it gets things moving. It gets decision makers to pay attention. And the authorities come into play and say, well, the media's reported this so much, we need to pay attention to this. We're seeing it in Zambia also. I see it with news diggers. They do some really good investigative journalism. We had something going on in the Copper Belt with one of the companies, and there was a toxic spill that caused devastation. Right. They did a really good job in making sure that information came out. They did a documentary, etc. And like I said, with you folks, when it comes to conversations around what's happening financially with the country, the approach that Financial Insights take, that I love personally because I love media, right, is you don't just talk about the numbers, right? You have different players who come onto your shows, but you talk about what those numbers mean. We're at Arcades right now, and there's a clip that went viral because somebody forwarded it to me. I was having coffee in New York at some point, and somebody sent that to me. Somebody from Arcades management was talking about the business and where it's come from and where they are now and how well it's doing, etc. That story wasn't just about Arcades as a business, right? It was a positive story about an enterprise that's doing well in Zambia, that's putting Zambia on the map. Because some of those numbers, those are really international numbers that were being said. So think about an investor or somebody coming from outside who looks at that and says, hey, there's that kind of potential in Zambia for business to make this kind of money? I'm taking my dollars there. So it's that kind of reporting that honestly is shaping and reshaping the narrative and picture that our country has. So those are some of the examples: Rwanda, South Africa, and Zambia also.
Absolutely. And what do you think unites all these successes that you've talked about?
The thing is, it's a really good question. The key thing, and you've heard me say this throughout our discussion today, is consistency. You can't tell one story today and then tell a different story tomorrow. If you decide and agree that our story for Zambia, for example, is going to be economic recovery, then you need to be consistent in hitting those notes. Now, we need to be accurate because from a strategic comms and media perspective, one of the key ethics is you need to be accurate, right? So we're not telling lies or we're not telling a distortion of the truth. What we are saying is, this is actually what's happening, and positively, this is what's going on. So consistency in your storytelling over a period of time. It has to be over a sustained period, right? The second thing is clear positioning. What is your story? I gave an example of Rwanda, and I worked closely with, in my previous life, I worked closely with one of the comms guys who was part of the under team that was developing the Rwanda message. They only had 3 messages. The whole country only had 3 messages. We're clean, we're safe, we're corrupt-free. That's all. Everything else that they did drove back to that. So they had a very clear position of what story they wanted to tell about their country. And as we've all agreed just now, that has worked brilliantly because now Rwanda is a beacon for places in Africa as one of those must-visit places. So clear positioning is crucial. The final thing, if you can allow me, is audience intentionality. When I came here and I met your team, I met Chewe, and one of the things I was told Chewe does is she packages your news media for different platforms, maybe for reels on TikTok or shorter, kind of snappy, in your face, key information, walk away. That is audience intentionality because that has a specific group. You also say to me one of the successes you've had over the last few months is you do a magazine, post-event magazine. So there's a big tax conference taking place, Financial Insights is covering, you package that into a magazine that is being specific to an audience that's going to look at that. People consume media differently. Some folks want to doom scroll on TikTok, and somewhere in between the latest with Diddy and what's going on in South Africa, Financial Insights pops in with what's happening in Zambia from a positive perspective. You've reached an audience there. It changes perceptions. Maybe that person is a decision maker somewhere. It influences how they think and feel about the country and eventually what they're going to do about it. Similarly, I start my day with a cup of coffee. I'm looking, and I receive your newsletter of something that took place at a tax conference. In very snippet, while I'm enjoying my latte, I'm going through and going, wow, this is what's going on back at home. This is excellent. You need to be audience intentional. Some folks to this day will still want to pick up a hard copy newspaper, right? And that's how they consume. So you need to be audience specific. Package your messaging towards the right audience. A mentor of mine is a senior guy in the UN. He likes this phrase, fish where the fish are. He likes to fish. Fish where the fish are, right? So put your messaging, your communications, direct it where the audience is. So those are some 3 elements that you can think through about how to become a better communicator, but also how to tell better stories.
Absolutely. That's so insightful. Now, obviously our interview takes place on the back of something monumental for Zambia.
Right.
A couple of years ago, Zambia defaulted on its debt.
Right.
Over the last couple of years, the government's obviously been working very hard. And just before you came, the big announcement comes where, now our debt position has, even the country rating has actually improved.
Right.
How can Zambia tell its economic recovery story in a way that is credible and compelling both locally and internationally?
I love that question because I'm personally passionate about it. I want to see what's going on at home when you're away. You're still connected, you remain Zambian, so you always want to know what's going on. And I saw that piece, and I was very happy as a Zambian to see that S&P credit assessors, they've shifted our credit profile upwards, and we're in a better position. And that was great. It's a very good story. But I will say, one of the things, and I can be critical here because we love what we do. The challenge that I saw is that I didn't read that story from a Zambian outlet first. I read it from a South African outlet. Yeah. So one thing we can do is we need to own the narrative early. And it's happening. I see there's some executives, his name goes, but this gentleman who works close with the president, he was, that was one of the other areas that I saw that come out, which was great. It came out, he put a reel out about what's happening, what does this mean, etc. So those are positive steps that we need to do. But collectively, as media, news media in Zambia, we need to tell more of that story. And we need to own the narrative early. Just as that coming out, before it hits a South African news outlet, before it hits a Kenyan news outlet, let the story be owned by our Zambian news media first. So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is we need, and I think we're doing it, again, these are just, it's not to say that we're not doing a great job at all. I think we can always do better. There's always room for improvement, right? So one other area that we can do is let's make policy outcomes visible. So what does that mean for Zambia, that our credit rating has gone up? What does that mean for my late grandmother's family who live in Katete? What does that mean for them? Earlier today, we discussed the risk premium that is placed based on reputation. Correct. We talked about $4.2 billion, and we went down and said what that means is 12 children have access to quality education. Let those policy outcomes be told from a human-centered perspective. I want to know what it means when the credit situation has changed. How does it affect my pocket, as I'm waking up? Or how does it affect the lady selling tomatoes? Let's tell that story, because it really does. I read a lot of comments on social media where people say, we can't eat the credit or the credit rating. Well, the truth is that you won't feel it immediately, but it has real impacts, real human impacts at the end of the day. We need to communicate that more. We need to do that more deliberately, right? And the final thing is, which I think we're doing very well, but obviously can do better, is put credible messengers forward. Put people who people listen to, right? Sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger, Right. So let the message be carried by a person or a group of people, an expert, whoever it is that you choose, that people will actually want to perk up and pay attention to. So that's some ways that we can do better. I think we're already doing great as a country, but certainly we can improve.
Yeah, you've actually touched on a very interesting point, and it feeds into my next question, around headline framing, because
Right.
it's something that in Financial Insight we're constantly improving with the writing protocol that we've adopted, especially around the pulses.
Right.
What kind of headline or framing would make an international editor care about Zambia without falling into the old cliches?
It's a good question. If you allow me, I'll answer it from this perspective. At some point in my career, I worked for a very renowned communications consultancy group called the APO Group, and had very esteemed marquee clients, Microsoft, etc. Part of my job was to pitch for stories. How can I place my clients in international news outlets and so on, so that they can tell the story on a credible platform? Correct. And one way in which I did this was obviously making friends, etc. But a key way was when I send my pitch, it needs to be immediately catchy. You need to think about the editor at Wall Street Journal or the BBC or CNN. You need to think about what is it that motivates them right now? What's going on in their world that would make them look at a story just from the headline and say, this is a story I'm interested in, and we can go ahead and cover it. Because oftentimes, stories are shut down purely based on the headline. It doesn't capture the editor. It doesn't capture the reporter. So you're pitching a story, you're telling something like that. It doesn't capture them. They think, well, this is just new, it's the same old. So let's be practical here. The story that CNP credit assessors upward shifted the credit profile of Zambia. I saw a headline that said, Zambia's credit profile improved, something like that. Great, right? But what if we said something like, can Zambia become the proof point restructuring and reform can work? right? Remember, you said it yourself at the beginning that we defaulted
Correct.
on, and this is well known, we're one of the first, I think there are only about 2 countries globally, and we were one of those.
COVID era, yeah.
There you go. It's not a great headline to have as a country, right? But now we have this amazing, we've come from that, and in what, that you say COVID era, this is now 2025. So in 5 years, right? So kudos to the current administration. In 5 years, our profile is changing. But what headline is it, right? You know, I would think, somebody might say, Africa's first to reset the debt rules. Zambia charts a new path for sustainable finance. Think about it as, who's the guy who's going to look at this? When you say Africa's first to reset something, to change something, immediately I'm looking at that going, oh wow, Africa's first. And then next to that, Zambia? Zambia is first at what? We're resetting something, right? The headline has to be catchy. And this is both for the person reading, but also when you're pitching a story. Because the guy at Financial Times, he receives not less than 1,000 pitches every single day. And he's only got a few seconds to look at what you're talking about before he decides he's going to run your story. We want those stories to be in global publications. We want the Financial Times and other folks to report about us. Let's make the headline catchy. And by the way, this is not embellishing. This is just telling a better story. Because it's actually true. We were one of the first to default, and we're getting back on our feet. Let's jazz that up. As my good buddy I work with, African American, he says, let's add some flavor, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of flavor, newsrooms across the world are now adopting AI.
Oh yeah.
Financial Insight is, also adopting. There's a lot of stuff that we've been experimenting with. How do you see AI tools shaping the future of storytelling for Africa?
I think AI certainly is the future for many things in the world, and that's happening. We can see it taking place at a very quick pace, right? One of the areas that news media houses, such as Financial Insights, and kudos to you folks for being one of the first pioneering that in Zambia, so well done. But one of the ways that you can use AI is understanding metrics. Remember we talked about analytics and metrics, right? If you want to know where is your content being consumed the most, there are AI tools now that you can plug into your platforms that will tell you this reel that Chewe did well on TikTok. All right, what was the message behind this reel? Well, maybe it was about profile, credit profile, etc. And it helps you then to start shaping stories that are relevant to people because they're being consumed on those platforms. So certainly from an analytics and metrics perspective, AI can do wonders. The other thing is that right now it used to be known as a 24-hour news cycle. You ever heard of that? In comms we say that a lot, right? It's a 24-hour news cycle. Well, right now there's conversations taking place that it's now a 60-minute news cycle. Attention spans have reduced. People are moving on to the next thing. So for you to capture what's happening, you need to figure out what people are paying attention to. And that's another area that AI can provide some advantage to a news house. And what it is that before, in the brick and mortar days, you needed people on the ground to talk to people. You needed to be really large, and that took a lot of resources. And many businesses, many news houses, they don't have those kinds of resources. AI helps to simplify that process. With a small but mighty team, you can do great things if you use AI in the right way. So off the top of my head, and just checking through my notes, those are some of the immediate things that come to mind. Another one very quickly is content creation. Now, I'm a purist. That means I don't believe AI will ever replace a human being. I've had very difficult conversations, mostly in bars with some of my good friends about this. But I'll tell you why. Allow me to defend this position. A human being will always understand the way another human being thinks, right? I certainly think AI can help to do things better, quicker, but without a human eye, it's very difficult that the final message is going to resonate to another human being. Have you all reached the point where you can look at content and immediately know that somebody just ran this through ChatGPT?
Yeah, we have.
Doesn't that make you switch off? Right? Don't you? Sometimes you look at it and this is purely chat. Nobody put any effort. Right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example. you've received a birthday message before, right? We think we all have. Have you ever received on WhatsApp, somebody says happy birthday, and at the top you see forwarded?
Yeah.
It's terrible, right?
We didn't even have criticism, just typing out the message.
Type it out. That's how I feel when I see AI-generated content. I feel like somebody's just forwarded something to me. And what's happening now, and research is showing this, folks from African No Filter and other places are showing that people are beginning to psychologically switch off to purely content that is generated and driven by AI. They trust it less. Right now, you see a photo on Facebook or wherever, your immediate thought is this real or is this AI? So as much as AI is doing great things, there's a growing mistrust that needs to be controlled by the human component. So that's the final bit that I would like to say, that AI will certainly help news houses do better and be better, turn things around quicker, etc. But there always has to be a Ngosa or a Mwelwa or somebody behind that makes sure that it's packaged to be consumed by a human being.
Right. Again, I just want you to just re-echo, some of the risks, around AI. And maybe you could just share some examples of how, those are being mitigated in, US sort of media houses. Because even with us, it's been like a wee bit of a challenge where, you're experimenting with certain like headlining, but then, what you want is to have a human face.
There you go.
Yeah. How do you
It's a great question, and I realized I started to tap into it briefly in my previous response. But one thing we should remember is that the leaders in AI are in the West. The biggest AI companies are mostly American, sometimes Chinese. These are the largest. I could be wrong, and please keep me honest, but I haven't heard of an African one yet. And we all know that AI churns out information based on data. We talked earlier about the reputation that surrounds Africa. So that's the data input that AI presently has, because that's sort of what we are known for, kind of that monolithic, negative, etc. Now tell me, if a system gives out information based on what's inputted into it, and if the input is negative or bad, very likely that the output is also going to be negative and bad. Correct. And so that's one of the things, is there's an amplified bias based on the data sets that are primarily from the Western side to churn out outputs and outcomes which are biased towards the already created perceptions. So that's a risk. The other thing that we just talked about is deepfakes and misinformation. A lot of that is going on now, and people are doing amazing things. Right now, you and I are having a conversation here, Mwelwa. It's going to go out, somebody's going to look at it. They can take our likeness and change the conversation entirely. Somebody might say, I support Manchester United, that it came from me. Yeah. And that's a deep fake. But this is happening every single day. This is happening every single day because AI sometimes remains unregulated. Right now, policy is being developed to manage AI. In the US, I sit on a board called the socialmedia.org board, and some of the discussions we're having with different communications experts globally is what kind of policy can be put in place. So that's a risk. We need to be very serious about taking into account, is this real? Is this fake? Is it misinformed? The other thing we talked about is that AI will certainly help to augment and improve the work, right? But if we become lazy with it, it will replace people. It will certainly replace people. So my guidance and advice, particularly from a communications perspective, is master how to use AI to make yourself better. But do it in such a way that if somebody else is using the same tool, the output will not be as great as if you're the one who did it, because you're the one that's mastered it. So let it help to improve your work, but not replace your work.
All right. No, thank you so much for sharing that. As we get to the tail end of our conversation, we've obviously covered the issue of stereotypes, lessons from the US, African success stories. We brought Zambia into the narrative as well, and the role of AI.
Right.
If every African journalist or comm strategist had to adopt one habit tomorrow, what would it be?
That's a great question. I said earlier, a key example that came from Western media, the US specifically in Seattle, is solutions-driven journalism. If one thing that we can adopt as African communicators is following up on impact, okay? So my challenge back to you as Financial Insights is this. You brought up a very key example of the credit profile of Zambia being upgraded. My challenge is follow up on that impact. Tell stories about what that actually means for the lady that's selling tomatoes, for my barber, good guy who I'm going to see later. Tell me the story of what that means for him, right? We've got a big conversation right now. The biggest thing everyone's talking about is load shedding. I just came to see 21 hours of no power, 3 hours or so. And I hope, now this is off the record, I hope somebody can remove the wrinkles on my shirt because I had no power to iron. But that's a big issue right now, right? And there've been several commitments that have been made, right? So that's a story everyone's tracking. My challenge to you folks who are doing amazing work already is, can you tell the impact of those commitments? I heard recently that there's over $100 million that has been set aside by the government for solar programs across the country. All right, great. Can you track the impact of that story so that you can be able to say, this was the commitment, over time, this is what has happened. So two challenges. And for me, that's a key thing that African communicators should do. Or can you go back to some of the commitments that were made and are they yielding positive impact, and tell those stories? We all know that bad news travels faster than good news, right? They say the truth, the lie will go around the world while the truth is putting on its pants, right? The challenge that we should be having is, yes, things are bad, and let's not sugarcoat it. They are. You know, there are certain things that could be better. But what has happened previously that we can follow up on and say, actually, this is great. This is what has happened. And I know at the tail end, but I want to give you, as we go towards the end of our discussion, I've got a question I'd like to pose to the room. And you guys can keep this or take this out. I talk quite a bit. I'm a comms guy. But what's the one story you think trended the first half of this year, removing the late president? The one story that trended about Zambia globally, first half of this year from January to June. One story. Anyone?
It's been such a long year.
It's been. Wow. Can you think of something that was newsworthy? Yeah.
The health theft.
Oh yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Yeah.
That absolutely was a big one.
Yeah.
That was a big one. It really was, and it dominated some US news outlets as well, because it's taxpayers' resources, so they're cautious about where the money is going. But I'll tell you, the one story that was shared, and I did the research before I came here, in 53 countries, was that 2 witch doctors were arrested for trying to assassinate the president using juju.
I remember that one.
Do you guys remember that story?
Yes, I remember reading it from a South African outlet, actually.
There you go.
Yes, yeah.
Would you believe that's the story that's trending about? I have a guy that I work, his office is right opposite mine, and he's very curious about cultures and where I'm from and so on. And he walked into my office one day. He was playing Zambian music, your maps actually. He was playing Zambian music. This is a guy who's never been to the country. I'd never heard of it before he met me. And he came in and said, dude, you guys arrested two witch doctors who are trying to assassinate the president using juju. I said, bro, that's AI. but that's a real story. So what I'm saying is that story started from here. We were the first to report about that story, and we made it such a big joke, and people laughed, and we drove traffic to it. And the algorithm, for people who are looking at what's going on in Zambia, they're seeing where is the heat map, where are Zambians commenting the most? And Zambians are going there, and so the algorithm starts to drive people who are searching about Zambia to that particular story, and that story has been retold in 53 countries so far that I know of. It's even been translated in some of the local languages for those countries so that folks can understand. I don't think that's the best story that talks about our beautiful country. I think we can do better as African communicators to tell the right stories about where we're from. So that's one thing that I'll put out.
Right. As we end, and to tie us back to the title,
right.
Africa's Untold Stories,
right.
Beyond Stereotypes.
Right.
If you could leave us with one line that sums up what Beyond Stereotypes really means, what would it be?
That's a tough one. Here's what I would say. Tell the African story as it is. It's complex, it's sometimes contradictory, but it's capable. we're not a caricature, right? So tell the story of complexity, of dynamism, the community and people that we are. Zambians, one of the things we're known for around the world is just how great individuals are, how friendly we are. That is a currency that would make somebody think, I need to go to that country because they're going to welcome me. And guess what? In doing so, you increase tourism potential, you increase forex, and so on and so on. It seems like something very small. So I wish I could do this in one line, but I'll say it this way. Let's tell the story of Africa as it is, right? That it is complex, that it's contradictory, but more than anything, we are capable.
Absolutely. And Phiri, thank you so much for joining us. We know that you're pressed for time, but we have got an opportunity for one question from the audience. Who will it be? Who's brave enough to ask a question from this wonderful conversation that we've had? Anyone?
Yeah.
You've got a question? Yeah, please.
I've learned so much already from you today. I think something that I'm curious to understand is, you know the saying, no publicity is bad publicity, in that sense. Do you believe that it's possible for companies, brands, media houses to be able to ride off a bad publicity wave and turn it into their benefit, and for it to be sustainable in the long run? Yeah.
I think that's a great question. I 100% think it's a great question. The quick answer is yes, certainly. And that's why there's a division of strategic comms that is known as crisis communications. And I'm trying to think immediately what example I can give, but I'll say it this way. There are times, I'll give you an example because I worked on this specifically. So to start with, yes, bad publicity can be turned by either the brand that's received the bad publicity working with news houses into good publicity that actually sustains the image and reputation of the business or organization for the better going forward. I'll tell you a story and I'll remove the names because I haven't been cleared to tell the story, but I'll give you, it's an example that works. I was once representing a client who manufactures elevators and escalators. Well-known global client manufactures elevators and escalators. And they had a building in Johannesburg, South Africa, which was set for demolition. So it was an abandoned building. And unfortunately, some kids were playing in that space and they fell through one of these unused elevator shafts. And sadly, that kid who was 5 years old plummeted to her death. It was a terrible story, right? And South Africa, we've just talked about it being a powerful country when it comes to news media and utilizing, sometimes even weaponizing the news media as a watchdog. A big story started to happen around that. Now, certainly that company needed to think through its options and talk about responsibility, what could have been done better, etc. But obviously the company's reputation was at risk, right? Especially operating in that market. South Africa was one of their largest markets in Africa. So certainly that was going to affect their GDP, well, not GDP, was going to affect their bottom line as a business, right? And obviously folks were going to, they were going to either be sanctioned by the government or, so it was really just a bad situation. As you can imagine, the loss of life in any situation is terrible. So we were engaged, I was working for a business that looks at some of these things, and that was my client personally. One of the things that I did was talk about what can we do better? How can we help? This story should be a way for this business to understand what can be done better. So first thing is we made sure we were the first voice that was heard about this situation. We didn't wait for this story to break by somebody else. We're the first people. This has happened. One of our facilities was involved. We're taking this very seriously. We're looking into it. First thing is own the problem, right? Cautiously own the problem. And then we started working with the communities to say, how as a business can we serve you better learning from this experience? How, maybe this is an opportunity for us to look into expanding what we're doing. And this business, by the way, had a perfect safety record up until this point. So that had the potential to change that. So we put those credentials forward. We've had a perfect safety record. Certainly this is a wake-up call that something needs to be done. How can we do it? They didn't shift the blame. We didn't shift the blame, right? We didn't say, hey, what are those kids doing in that building? No. So we turned that situation, we engaged the community, and by the end of that process that took place, the community saw the business as a partner, as a friend that they can trust, that this thing happened, but certainly they can do better going forward. And the business and the community linked arms and said, how can we work together to serve you better? From a community perspective, what can we do better? From a business standpoint, what can we do better? We saved that business in reputation costs over $100 million that they would have lost had the business shut down even for a day. And by the way, the business continued to operate. It did not stop. They didn't have sanctions. They needed to have some very difficult conversations with policy and decision makers, but the business is thriving to this day. So that's an example that I'm honored to have been a part of and worked with those folks. But that's an example that, of how a bad situation or bad publicity can be turned into something great and good for a company going forward. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Eneya, thank you so much for coming to
Hey guys, thanks
the
for
House
having
of
me.
Financial Insight. It's been such a pleasure, sharing all these wonderful insights. The interview will be going viral, we hope. And we just, on behalf of me and the team, you've been a very instrumental part in the growth, being as, one of my advisors, especially on global strategies.
Absolutely.
You did introduce us to APO.
Right.
That relationship continues to thrive. And now we've got the UN Compact, which hopefully will be coming our way as well.
Excellent.
So I just want to say on behalf of me and the team, thank you so much for nursing us to adulthood, but just being that strategic eye.
Absolutely.
On our
Hey,
behalf.
I'm learning from you folks. I think you're doing an amazing job. I'm your biggest fan and follower. Keep doing what you're doing. Amazing work to each and every one of you guys. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eneya.
Good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, there you've heard it for yourself. We've been speaking to Eneya, who is a global comms strategist. This interview will be available on all our Financial Insight platforms. We're available on, Clarence, how many platforms is that again? I lose count half the time. 8 digital plus TV as well. So stay tuned for more insights as we continue to speak to other global comm strategists who will be coming on this special series. I've been your host, Mwelwa Kenneth, and as we always say at Financial Insight, get to know. Fantastic.